These days, everyone has a hot take on the iPhone X, and of course they do. Tim Cook said it would set the path of Apple's technology for the next decade. That's great, but what about the people who like their iPhones just fine the way they are? Well, for them, Apple built the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. They might be more conventional than Apple's other new phone, but make no mistake, these devices are big steps forward for the iPhone. Since these are more traditional iPhones, everything is where you'd expect it to be. Both phones have lightning ports on the bottom, no headphone jacks, and capacitive home buttons right under their screens. You'll notice a few differences the moment you pick up the 8 or 8 Plus up though. For one, their aluminum backs have been replaced with glass for some Qi-compatible wireless charging. Charging works well even with cases on, just as long as you make sure you line up everything properly. Apple gave us a Belkin charging pad, and sometimes I managed to put the 8 down just right so that the charging light would go on but the phone wouldn't actually charge. Other wireless charging pads I tried work fine though. These glass backs have other benefits too. They let radio signals pass right through them, so the only antenna bands here are tiny ones on the phone sides. Oh, and most importantly, that glass just feels really nice. It's easier to grip than metal and has avoided nicks pretty well so far too. There's obviously a lot of stuff inside these phones, and Apple squeezed everything into bodies that are a little longer, thicker, and heavier than before. That doesn't mean much for the smaller iPhone 8, but the combination of its weight and bezels make the 8 Plus feel a little unwieldy. It's nothing new, but still disappointing since the Galaxy S8 Plus and the LG V30 have bigger screens and feel better. While we're talking about screens, the ones we've got here haven't really changed that much. The 8 still has a 4.7-inch display, the 8 Plus still has a 5.5-inch display, and both of them are just as bright and contrasty as before. Everything is still nice and crisp too, and colors pop especially nicely because of the screen's wide color gamuts. The biggest difference is the True Tone tech Apple transplanted into these things from the iPad Pro. The phones use data from 4 sensors to tune the screen's color temperatures depending on your surroundings. It doesn't sound like a huge deal, but I actually love it. When True Tone is on, colors are technically a little less accurate, but they look more natural and are generally easier on the eyes. I've been a little spoiled by other phones though, so I still wish Apple had gone with some HDR-friendly displays here. Anyway, these stereo speakers are noticeably better too. You'll still want to use a pair of headphones whenever you get a chance, but the speakers are louder than last year's, and frankly, that's good enough for me. Both phones also run iOS 11, and I just can't go through everything Apple squeezed into that update here. We'll have our full review ready soon, but in the meantime, let's just run through the highlights. Control Center looks completely different and packs handy shortcuts to new features like Do Not Disturb While Driving and the Screen Recorder. It doesn't take long to get used to, but if you're anything like me, you'll screw up your screen brightness a few times trying to get out of there. The Notification Center is basically gone too, replaced with your lock screen. It's nothing if not familiar, but I wish Apple had cooked up smarter ways to organize all these notifications, like by app, for example. Siri sounds infinitely better than before, and she's surprisingly great at translations now too. Meanwhile, the App Store has been completely redesigned with more of an emphasis on videos and app listings and Apple's own write-ups of apps and app culture. Oh, and there are some sweet new wallpapers. All told, the iOS 11 update packs a lot of handy functionality, but it won't fundamentally change the way you use your iPhone. The iPad is a different story, but seriously, just go check out our full iOS review. Now we're getting to the really fun stuff. Both the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus use the same 12-megapixel camera, and it has mostly been a pleasure to shoot with. My test shots had punchier colors and slightly more detail than the same photos taken with a 7 Plus, and in most daylight scenarios, the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus captured more detailed photos than Samsung's Galaxy Note 8. Curiously, the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus consistently churned out photos that looked more true to life, but the Note 8s were brighter and slightly more saturated. It's kind of like Apple tried to provide the most accurate photos possible, while Samsung wanted the world to look a little nicer than it actually does. In any case, both the 8 and 8 Plus did well in low light, though the Note 8 has a slight edge over both of them. That's where Apple's improved quad LED flash comes in. It fires quickly after a longer exposure, so it's a little better at preventing inadvertent blur than before. Of course, the iPhone 8 Plus has a second 12 megapixel telephoto camera that's just a little less good, especially in low light because it has an f2.8 aperture compared to the wider f1.8 aperture in the wide-angle camera. Still, having two cameras here allows for some extra tricks. Portrait mode is back, and it's much better than what we tested last year. This time your subject can be within 8 feet of your camera, and the 8 Plus does a better job of figuring out where the edges are and kind of blurring out the background behind them. New to the 8 Plus is Apple's portrait lighting feature, and it's definitely still in beta. Aside from the standard natural light mode, the studio light brightens up your subject's face without trouble. Contour light, however, is meant to make subjects look more dramatic, but it usually just made me, a brown guy, look darker and even more ominous than before. Stage light and stage light mono both black out everything behind your subject, and they generally produce results that are pretty awkward. A lot of these new photo features are made possible by Apple's new hexa-core A11 Bionic chipset, and man, this thing is a powerhouse. At any given time, the 8 and 8 Plus are mixing and matching its performance and efficiency cores, which results in pretty effortless power no matter what you're doing. The 8 Plus seems better equipped to handle intense tasks though, because it packs 3 GB of RAM compared to the normally 2 GB. All that extra horsepower came in really handy when testing some pre-release augmented reality apps. Despite not technically being done yet, I'm very impressed. The 8 and 8 Plus seem just as good at rendering virtual objects onto physical spaces as Google's Tango apps do, if not a little better, and that's without extra hardware. You might not have jumped on the AR bandwagon yet, but don't worry. The new iPhones have more than enough power to make this stuff and everything else look incredible. Battery life was solid too, and Apple wasn't kidding when it said the iPhone 8s generally last as long as the iPhone 7s. The iPhone 8 Plus's larger battery helped it stick around for longer. In general, if I played my cards right, I could get nearly a day and a half of use out of it, and on quiet days like weekends, I could potentially come close to 2 days. When the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus were announced, they were easily ignored in favor of the more exciting new iPhone 10. Well, you'd be wrong to overlook these things. While they might not be as immediately exciting, the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus pack some serious upgrades and are easily the best traditional iPhones Apple has ever made.